So a friend of mine was 6 years old when she told her mother that the lady who used to live here told me that she hates the wallpaper, and that you are covering her note. My friend's mom just thought it was make-believe rambling and forgot about it. Well, 12 years later, when the mom is redecorating and takes down the wallpaper in the attic, she finds a suicide note scratched into the wall. The mom freaks out and calls my friend and starts crying, asking if she remembered anything more about the woman who spoke to her. My friend starts to recall the woman and starts to freak out, saying she only remembered talking to her in the attic. I work in a preschool. Creepy stuff gets said and done all the time. The one that sticks out to me happened last year. There was a small kitchenette area in our classroom that the kids use during free time for playing house or whatever pretend games they think up. There was one little girl that I was keeping a close eye on, mostly because of how withdrawn from the other kids she was. I noticed she was playing with a baby doll in the kitchenette, rocking it back and forth and singing to it. She then took the baby, shoved it into the play oven, and slammed the door shut. She turned around, looked straight at me and said, "Sometimes bad babies go in timeout," in the creepiest little girl voice I've ever heard, before smiling and running off. That one really shook me. I was tucking in my 2-year-old. He said, "Goodbye, Dad." I said, "No, we say goodnight." He said, "I know, but this time it's goodbye." I had to check on him a few times that night to make sure he was still there. When I was about 3, we had a cat that had stillborn kittens. I asked my father if we could make crosses for them, which he did. As he was making them, I asked, "Aren't those too small?" My dad replied, "What do you mean?" "Aren't we going to nail them to them?" I iterated. After several moments of silence, my dad said, "We're not going to do that." One night, I see my kid crying. I ask him, "Why are you crying?" He replies, "Bad man." "What bad man?" "There," she said as she points behind me at the dark corner of the room. The lamp on the bookshelf next to said darkened corner falls off as I turn to look. She slept in our bed that night. My 3-year-old daughter stood next to her newborn brother and looked at him for a while, then turned and looked at me and said, "Daddy, it's a monster. We should bury it." My kid's Catholic school is over 100 years old. There is a basement under the gym that's used for storage. I was subbing once and during recess, one of the kickballs goes down the stairs. A little girl was standing at the top of the stairs yelling, "Just throw it up to me." I went over and asked who she was talking to and she replied, "That big man down the stairs." I went down and there was nobody down there, and it was the only way in. I asked some of the other kids if they'd seen the man before and they said, "Yes, but Sister told us not to talk to him." I asked them to describe Sister and they described her as a nun. There haven't been nuns at the school in 40 years. After my kid told me he was scared one night, I told him, "Go back to sleep. There isn't anything under your bed." He said, "He's behind you now." I still haven't gotten over that one and still shiver at the memory. "So I shouldn't throw him in the fire?" said my 3-year-old daughter, holding her baby brother for the first time. I was sound asleep, and at around 6 am, I was woken up by my 4-year-old daughter's face inches from mine. She looked right into my eyes and whispered, "I want to peel all your skin off." The backstory here is that I'd been sunburned the previous week and was starting to peel. In my sleep-addled state, however, it was pretty terrifying for a few seconds. I didn't know if I was dreaming or what was going on. So a little backstory. When I was a kid, Mr. Rand used to come into my room 4 or 5 times a week. He'd talk to me and tell me about stuff and how he was killed in World War II. See, old mate Rand was a figment of my 4-year-old imagination. Anyway, one day when I was 9 or so, Mr. Rand stopped showing up. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, and my son, who was about 5 at the time, walks out of his room one night at about 11:30 and says there's a man in his room. I flip out and run in his room to find nobody, to which he then says, "Mr. Rand said you can't see him anymore, but he's okay." The kid's got his own imaginary mate called Mr. Rand, but they only chat once or twice a year. My toddler went through a phase where she would constantly say hi to things. Hi, 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 hi. One day, it came out as sounding more like die, 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 die. So I say to her, "What's that you're saying?" She turns to face me and just whispers, "Die." My niece was sitting on the couch with a weird look on her face. Her mum asked her what she was thinking about, and she said, "I'm imagining the waves of blood rushing over me." Turned out they'd been at a local science museum with an exhibit on the circulatory system. One of the features was a walk among some giant fake blood vessels, and she was just remembering that. When I was about 4, I would remember talking to Mr. Peterson whenever I was at my grandmother's house. He looked like a hobo from the Great Depression, had a guitar and sang me old-timey blues. He told me that he died when he fell off a train when he was riding whilst drunk on moonshine. I stopped seeing him when I was about 6. Anyway, 6 months ago, I found my dad's old acoustic guitar and started playing. And my little cousin told me, "Mr. Peterson is proud of you," and left. I don't know what to think. My mum's dad died 10 years before I was born. I was about 6 or 7 when my parents divorced. The day before my mum told me they were divorcing, apparently I was at the kitchen table drawing or something while my mother cooked dinner. She says I stopped instantly and looked toward the front door as if I'd heard it open. I stared for a long time, then giggled, turned toward my mum and said, "Granddad says don't worry, everything will be okay and he won't let anything bad happen." I then began humming and went back to my drawing. My mum says it's the single creepiest thing that's ever happened to her, and I have no memory of it happening. Getting my 2.5-year-old out of the bath one night, my wife and I were briefing on how important it was to keep her privates clean. She casually replied, "Oh, nobody scroofs me there. They tried once. They kicked the door in and tried, but I fought back. I died and now I'm here." She said this like it was nothing. When I was young, like maybe 2 years old, my grandma was in the hospital, dying of cancer. Obviously, I had no idea what was going on, but apparently, one day, when my mother and aunt were watching me, I suddenly looked at them and said, "Only one grandma." They kept trying to convince me otherwise, that no, I had 2 grandmas. but I kept repeating that line over and over. Then the phone rang. It was my uncle, calling to tell my mother that my grandma had passed away a few minutes ago. My mom has told me a story about my brother when he was younger. I guess he was sleepwalking and she was trying to coax him back to bed, and he said something along the lines of, "I would, but the devil is behind you." When my son was little, maybe 3, he used to do this weird crawl where he would slide his forehead along the floor. That was pretty creepy in itself. Then one day, he crawled across the hallway into my room like that and stood up a few inches from my face and made a weird meow sound. He got into bed with me and went to sleep. Another time, he was freaking out about a monster in the basement, so we went down and saw nothing. Of course, as I turned out the light and headed upstairs, he said, "He's right behind us now." I might have peed a little. Possibly the creepiest thing he did was, one day I scolded him for misbehaving, so he hid his head under his blanket. I pretended I couldn't find him by saying, "Where's my little Carson?" He slowly lowered the blanket with a devil evil stare and said, "Carson is gone. I am Rick." I'm certain he's possessed. We never knew any Ricks as far as I can remember. Still don't. Never figured out where he picked up the name. When my little sister first started talking, she used to say some really disturbing things. She used to tell us about how her old family would put things inside of her and would make her cry, but her daddy eventually burned her so much that she was able to find us, her new family. She spoke about things like that from the ages of almost 2 to 4. She was much too young to have ever been exposed to any content where children or anyone could be sodomized, so my family has always thought she held memories of a prior life.